I'm really proud of the way The Best Medicine turned out, and I think it's very easy to say that it's the best in terms of production quality that, little movie that I've ever made. And it's kind of funny because it's almost impossible to see now that it's had some of the biggest technical problems that I've ever dealt with. Pretty early into production, after shooting, only a couple days of filming, there was the hard drive overheated, at one point, and I lost everything that was on it. I wasn't able to access any of the editing that I had done, any of the original files, any of the original source files for any of those early scenes that we had done. And part of the problem there is that I only had about 2 weeks to film with Paul Condon, and 5 days had already gone by pretty much, about half the time that I had to shoot with him. And so there's that question of what are you going to do when you lose half of one actor's footage? And so the immediate lesson there is back up your drives, always back up your material. That's the first lesson. I was able to recover enough of what I had lost through a couple of methods. So here's sort of the timeline of things as it happened. So I only had 2 weeks to film with Paul, only 2 weeks. And the drive, had its whole issue about a week into that. And so I was kind of struggling, but at that time, my goal was, I'm going to shoot the rest with Paul. I'm going to finish his filming this week. Maybe I'll be able to recover the files or reshoot stuff later. I'm going to figure that out later. So I went throughout the rest of that week and finished shooting with Paul, put it on a flash drive, 2 flash drives back, had it backed up, second copy there, and finished filming with Paul. And then I went back and said, well, what am I going to do about what I've lost that whole first week of shooting? So while I didn't have the original files anymore, I did have renders of the scenes that I had texted to Paul and Noah to show them how things had been going throughout each filming day at the end, to show it how it looked edited all together, to show them that. And so we ended up getting lucky because, while those edits had rough music, rough dialogue mixing, rough levels that, which I wish had, could have been better for some stuff. For some stuff, I could completely replace the audio. For when we shot at Moss Rock, there was no dialogue there, so I could completely replace all the music and audio later. But the truth is that I liked the first score that I had done so much for that edit that I ended up using that first edit's score for the ending film, because I couldn't rescore that and capture that original essence actually. But there was other stuff like the scene between Jonathan Crane and Bruce Wayne in the manor and Wayne Manor, when they're arguing, and that was a 4-minute scene where the only thing I had of that scene was a rough edit that I had texted that had a rough mix of the dialogue and rough music. So in order to have more options with editing the audio, we did ADR. Paul did ADR on his own. I recorded ADR with Noah because Paul, I only had 2 weeks before he was out of town. And so Paul did that on his own. And the other stuff, there was a scene that didn't make it in the film where the Joker confronts Bronski at the end of the film, but I took it out because of pacing. And then there was also a scene where the Red Hood kills the councilman, and that ended up being reshot entirely because I didn't have time that afternoon to make an edit of the scene, so I had no copy of the footage in any form. And then I would have had to do ADR for it, even if I did have a copy of that footage. And so I got lucky. And then I had a render of the render of the office scene worked out just fine that I texted because, there was no music in there. So the dialogue was in there. And I didn't have to, worry about wanting to remix it later. So going forward from that, there were only a couple things that we had to reshoot. It was just the Red Hood scene, and then Parker's green screen news scene. I had to reshoot that, but then everything else I just continued production as normal. Finished shooting with Noah, finished shooting with Alex, and there was nothing behind schedule there at all. And so really, it only affected the beginning of shooting, but there was some key stuff there. There were some key scenes that I didn't have the source material for. I didn't have the source elements for. And so it took some, and it took some hard work, and it felt very scary to me to not have a lot of options when editing. Ultimately, not having a lot of options when editing the stuff that was just straight from the renders, I didn't have the source elements for, not having those options kind of forced me to be more creative. And ultimately, I do believe that it made the movie better. I think I do think it did. And at the very least, it made me better as a filmmaker. And so in a certain way, I'm thankful for that technical malfunction. And, it was hard for a lot of time because I had no idea if I was even going to be able to finish the movie. And so I'm very lucky that given what I had, and then being able to reshoot, and I'm very thankful that the result ended up being as good as it was.
I mean, obviously one problem that we had was your hard drive malfunctioning and you weren't able to get footage and audio clips off of it. So, like, one example of something that I had to do to help solve a problem was I recorded ADR, or a voiceover of the scene where Jonathan is telling Bruce about getting basically expelled from GU. And I think that the ADR ended up working and sounding pretty good. And I know that I was late to do it, and I finished my ADR a few days before the movie came out. But yeah, that was one problem that we had to overcome.
Well, challenges are part of the process of filmmaking. I mean, that's just, if you can't get past that, then you're never going to make it anywhere. But that's a good thing. That's what's fun about filmmaking, because there's no way to get better if you never have to think. And I think with The Best Medicine, the challenges that we faced as far as losing the drive and losing all of that footage really made us, think more, and probably ended up making the film better because you had to reshoot some scenes. And, just thinking about, I think it made you and me think more about what we did, because, you can always go back to a film that you've made and look at it and think, oh, what would I have done differently? But you can never really know that until you have to do it differently. And so when, losing all that footage, losing all the edited things, you literally have to go back and redo things. And I think that's an incredible way to learn.
The biggest lesson here is learn from your mistakes. That's I hope that I can say that'll that I won't have that much trouble again. But the thing is, there will always be a problem in every movie you do. Sometimes it's a little problem, sometimes it's a bigger problem, and that's not a terrible thing. Make sure it's not a big problem, but there will always be, maybe a discussion about, are you going to do it this way or this way? It might be that kind of problem. And so you have to be ready to deal with these kinds of things. And if you find that fun, then that's even better. Some of that stuff is very fun for me. The point is, every film is going to have problems, but that's just part of the process. So, and if that's a fun process for you, even better. So that's the lesson there. If you can accept challenges with that mindset of seeing problems as challenges, then that'll only make you better at being able to respond to that kind of stuff. And that'll make you that much better as a filmmaker.